Hey fam, how y'all doing today? Welcome back to History Highlights with Laney. Fam, let me know where you're from. If you're from the United States or not from the United States, your city or your state. In this video, we will highlight Cotton Kingdom and breeding farms.
By the 1820s, planters and would-be planters were moving in large numbers to places previously unavailable for settlement and growing the fiber for sale in Europe and New England, where a textile industry was beginning to thrive. The extension of the so-called Cotton Kingdom required new laborers as of 1808, when Congress ended the nation's participation in the international slave trade. Planters could no longer import additional slaves from Africa or the West Indies. The only practical way of increasing the number of slave laborers was through new births. In this book and many other sources, it's made to appear that America had little choice but to increase slave production to offset the altruistic end of the international slave trade, which Congress banned in 1808. Thomas Jefferson was president at the time. He had no problem with slavery. He literally loved his slaves, failing to free even Sally Hemings' children, all 6 of them believed to be his according to DNA evidence, until after his death. Jefferson was a Virginia farmer, knowing full well the value of slavery to the Southern economy. Congress at the time was controlled by the party he created, the Democratic Republican Party, not to be confused with either the Democrats or Republicans of today. They didn't end the international slave trade to harm slavery, but to preserve it, domestic slavery in particular. Congress wanted to decrease the external supply to keep prices up for the homebred slaves. It is worth noting that the Constitution of the United States, in addition to establishing the Electoral College to protect slave states and valuing slaves as 3/5 of a person while giving them no rights, specifically forbid banning the importation of slavery prior to 1808. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person. Article 1, Section 9, Constitution of the United States. Americans did not take up breeding slaves in response to congressional action. That action was taken on behalf of slave breeders as a protectionist means to keep the price of their products up. Jefferson's home state, Virginia, was the leading producer of slaves. Slavery eventually exceeded tobacco as their leading export. Maryland was second in slave production, followed by several other states. Economist Richard Stutch did a study which found that in 1860, on farms that had at least one female slave, the ratio of women to men was 2 to 1. In Virginia, female slaves exceeded male slaves by over 300,000. They were used to breed. Robert Lumpkin ran what is mostly referred to as a slave jail with little recognition that he ran the nation's largest breeding farm. He personally had 5 children with a slave Mary, who he ultimately remembered in his will. While owners of the breeding farm and plantations in general fornicated at will with their property, they also utilized selective breeding, maintaining their own large bucks and importing large male slaves for the purpose of breeding good workers for the fields. Black female slaves were some of the first people in the country to receive free health care. Breeders took an interest in fertility and expected multiple births from the women or the value would be diminished. Home medical journals were produced to help with difficult births that had previously been left to slaves to deal with. The quote from the film Gone with the Wind, "I don't know nothing about birthing babies," was meant to be a thing of the past. Many films have depicted boats arriving in New Orleans, which became the largest slave market in the antebellum South. Rarely is it shown those ships originated in Richmond and Baltimore. Slaves were also shipped by railroad, packed in boxcars, or sent by stagecoach. The slave breeding farms are mostly left out of the history books except those that deny their existence. Many of the white slave owners felt they were doing their female slaves a favor when they mated with them, granting them a respite from the brutish black slaves they would otherwise be subjected to. Generally speaking, it was the house slaves that got raped the most. Some mothers had to protect their offspring from the master's wife if she had reason to believe her spouse was the father. We're generally aware of that situation, which we've been led to believe was the worst case scenario. Nobody talks about the 13-year-old girl on a breeding farm forced to bear as many children as possible, only to have them ripped away and sent down south to endure a lifetime of hardship without a mother. On one breeding farm, the mother would be freed after birthing 15 children. What would she have to look forward to? America barely acknowledges that breeding farms existed, let alone document their role in creating the robust economy of the early South. There are self-evident truths mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, and those truths, so heinous, they must perpetually be covered up and denied. Breeding farms fall into the second category. History books, when they even mention it, suggest slave breeding didn't begin until after the banning of the Atlantic slave trade. In truth, it began decades earlier on plantations and farms, and only because America was prepared to produce the slaves it needed did it allow the end of the importation of slaves from Africa.
So, there you have it. A little bit of history on Cotton Kingdom and breeding farms. Be well, stay safe, and stay in peace, not pieces. Word of the year, love, love, love. Don't forget, fam, let me know what you think the word of the year should be starting in January 2024. Love y'all. See you soon.